will. And also, this came down a minute ago. The often discussed seeding, this is not something, Garrett, that you guys had. The often discussed seeding change to college football's playoff is unlikely to gain necessary support without compromise. Commissioners telling Yahoo Sports, Big 12, ACC, Mountain West leaders express skepticism to eliminating the conference championship bye, at least for 2025. That's not breaking news, but it is news, and it's not surprising those conferences would say they want to just, no, that's okay, we'll do that too. You guys get what you want. So there we go. I don't know what the compromises might be.
Well, I mean, if you look at the reactions to that, it's a bunch of like Volballs 24 saying, you peasants take your money and make your own playoff. And then there's, Big 12 Boomer 27 saying, screw you guys, we're going to draw our line in the sand and, we're going to fight you on this playoff because we know if we don't, we're going to get totally screwed in this thing. And so you've got two sides. There's the Big 12. There's who else was mentioned?
Mountain
The ACC.
West, ACC, yeah.
That know that if they give in to the changes after 1 year, they're probably never getting a bye again.
Yeah.
They're probably never going to get a bye. We saw how BYU was looked at, which they weren't really at all by the playoff committee. Arizona State, they were forced to look at. Basically, they're at the end of the season. But if the committee, and I know the committee has Big 12 reps and ACC reps, and it has Mountain West, it has people that are not just all SEC and Big 10, but it sure does feel like those folks never get their way and the others do, right? And so I think the general feeling is if you just capitulate and give into this, then that's all you're going to be doing. It's just giving into everything, and it's all changing in a year anyways. So I don't think you have to rush and we've got to get the seeds right for 2026. It's like, we can just do this thing one more year and just let it play out and see if it actually is better next season. And if it's not, it's changing anyway. So yeah, I don't think there should be a rush to overhaul this thing in year two, and especially not if you're the schools who are at risk of losing ground, because you know that as soon as you give away your automatic, then you're going to be fortunate to get anything. Well, and then if you're the SEC and the Big Ten, of course you want this to happen because you want to get your 6 teams into the playoff and shove them in there, even though we saw direct evidence this year that not every season means you're that deserving of it. So
the $8 million payday for the 4 conference champions from the college football playoff. And so if you give up the automatic bye with the conference championship, you're also then allowing $8 million to go somewhere else. It may not come back to you.
And the response, and Paul, I know you got something to say, but the response I see is like I said, big fuzzy Vols or whatever is saying that, well, make them take it or leave it. And it's well, I think there'd be legal ramifications to that. I don't think you're just going to just take half the country and just throw them to the side and say you're not allowed to play for the national championship anymore. It's not that simple. You can't just flip that switch. Now, if these two commissioners have been building their own league and structure and basketball tournament and all these other things for the past 2 years, which they might know how sneaky and company are, then they've got that option to go jump towards. But for right now, you can't just, give in and say, all right, well, here's the buys. No, of course you're not going to do that. And, of course, the SEC and Big Ten are going to feel as though they're deserving of it. So this will be a battle. And I don't know if they come to an agreement of some sort or whatever. But, yeah, if you're Brett Yormark or you're anybody else that's not, Sankey or Petiti, you're not giving away the real estate that you've just received and just handing it over knowing you're never going to get it back again. So, this will be a bit of a fight, but we knew that. We knew that the seeding and the power structure and control of who gets what, we already know that's been imbalanced, and there's still a lot to figure out there moving forward.
The thing they need to make sure that they do is stand their ground until there's no ground to stand on. Right? And the other thing is that when you have evidence like we do this year, like you said, Craig, that there might be some years where we look at it and go, man, all these 6 SEC teams need to be in. My God, in the NCAA tournament this year, that committee is going to be faced with how many of these SEC teams do we really need to put in, because they're all having great years and they all have great quad 1 wins, and they're all those numbers are lining up for them. They've had to do that in the basketball tournament with Big 12, Big 10, Pac-12, with ACC all the time. They've had to do that. So that's what the committee exists for, is to have those times where you're like, you know what, this is overwhelming, or here are the 12 or 68 or whatever best teams, depending on what you're talking about. But they have to, the ACC and Big 12 in particular, have to meet rhetoric with facts. And we saw facts this year of, hey, maybe you didn't need 5 teams in this thing. The 3 you had hit the wall at some point, and that's what happens when you play games. So let's not just write this in stone before the season starts and let it play out, and push back with the evidence that you have, as opposed to let's do this in August, which is what the SEC and Big Ten would rather have happen.
Yeah, and I mean, Dellinger has some quotes, and look, I totally understand the side as well of, well, you better like what you get, and you better be appreciative of what you have. I understand that to an extent. It's madly disrespectful, but I do get that there is a power imbalance, and that's not going to change, barring Arizona State winning the national title next year, and then Texas Tech finishing a runner-up, like some unprecedented run where you go see, we're taking real estate ourselves. Barring that, you're kind of at the whimsy, because you don't have the cachet that those other two do, much less the history and the money and all of that. So you can't just stand your ground forever. You're going to have to probably capitulate, and you have on some things. But, yeah, I don't think you need to fold for next year after 1 year of evidence.
Well, they're meeting Sunday. That's why this is a topic.
Right. So I think you see that in the comments and quotes that I'll read here, that they're not saying, screw you, take your ball and go home, either side. They're going to talk about it. But, yeah, the Big 12 and the ACC and the Mountain West have absolutely no incentive to just fork that over after 1 year because people feel like it didn't work out right. Brett Yormark, I'm open to a healthy discussion on the topic. I certainly have a point of view that will be expressed in the room, but I do not have the appetite to give up any financial reward that comes with a bye. Mm-hmm. So that makes sense, right? I mean, what's wrong with what he's saying there? I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that. Jim Phillips, ACC commissioner, referred to similar professional playoff formats that use automatic buys for teams that win divisions or conferences, like what the SEC and Big Ten are pretending like they want to be at certain points here over the last couple of years, such as the NFL. He cited the most recent regular season in which the Lions played the Vikings. The winner won the North, received a number 1 seed and first-round bye. Minnesota dropped a wild card, had to travel for a first-round game, and lost to the Rams. And he said, the NFL, which we believe is the highest level of football in our world, has a system that rewards divisional champions. You see it in MLB, too. It's not as if this system is so foreign. This shouldn't be used as a convenient rationale. It deserves a review, and we should talk about how it went, but it's not some exotic structure. So that's Phillips and Yormark, and I think that's very fair what they said. Let's talk about it, but we're not just going to say, well, this 1 year happened. Here you go. Here's $8 million that otherwise is ours, and here's a first-round bye, and here's a lessening of our champion. $8 million
to conferences that already have millions and millions more than you. You have to fight for that $8 million.
Exactly.
And the seat at the table. Xavier Wolf, thank you, sir, for the super chat. Love your passion for the game. 365 Sports.
Here's another thing, though. And look, because the SEC is going to just say, well, that's just 1 year, right? They're going to say, well, that's just 1 year. You can't base it off of 1 year. All right. So if that's the case, then I
think they're also saying the opposite.
Exactly.
That's just 1 year.
That's just 1 year. Well, when you talk about the seedings, you just say, well, that's also just 1 year. So if you guys are worried about blowouts, which happened when there were 4 teams, just say that. Yeah. You guys blew out each other. This was not Ohio State blew out Tennessee. It wasn't just the Big 12 teams and the ACC teams. In fact, the Big 12 team that played the playoff game that they did not get blown out.
No, they should have won.
They had Texas dead to rights at a point in that game. So, again, blowouts happen no matter what. So if you're saying we got to fix the seeding because of the blowouts, no, I mean, that's not.
I mean, and again, though, dude, it's one more year.
Yeah, it's one more year.
It's one more year.
Again,
so
that's the thing is you have to use that argument in the correct way,
right?
Because otherwise, it's gonna
get talked about this weekend. To your point, and
you're gonna have actual meetings that really are for 2026 and beyond, but they will discuss.
Yeah, they'll discuss this, and Yormark and his counterparts will all have their opinions on it. I mean, Sankey's quoted in here as well. So is Petiti. Petiti, once the field is set, we need to discuss how it should be seeded. I think some of this year's matchups in the round in which they occurred make that conversation necessary. I think everybody can agree with that part of it, but that's a different topic than, like, we're going to strip you of a bye and the millions that you would have made, and, that's a different conversation. He brought up a past quote from Greg Sankey as well. This is from Ross Dellinger's Yahoo article on all of this stuff we're talking about. Sankey, he brought up in the past, has openly expressed interest in exploring changes to a format that was created for 5 equitable power conferences, not the current landscape of 4 unequal leagues. He said,
and that's true.
And that's true. We're seeing the stress points that we knew would be there, but I actually think they are as or more volatile than we thought, he said last month. Now we have a whole different dynamic. So what happens? And that was from Sankey. But yeah, this is in place for one more year, but I totally get the seeding conversation, and I totally get everybody not just putting down their swords and saying, all right, take what you want from us, and we're just happy to be here. And there's businessmen and professionals here, and they'll talk it out. It's not, going to be a yelling and screaming match. But yeah, Brett Yormark and Phillips, yeah, I was thinking Petiti for some reason. Phillips need to fight for their schools, right? We'd say the same thing if the shoe was on the other foot, and they kind of see the writing on the wall in the future and what that looks like if they don't. And so, yeah, we'll see what those conversations look like. But I think we can all agree that, yeah, this is not a perfect playoff. We can tweak it, but it doesn't mean you just panic and overhaul the thing in the 2 weeks afterwards either, so.
Somebody mentioned that championship game on Monday night, Ohio State, Penn State. Since the playoff expanded to 4, and I don't know who had this, and I don't think it was Stuart Mandel, but sometimes he pops up these kind of nuggets, or Brett McMurphy, et cetera. Here are the spreads of the championship games since 2014 when they went to 4 teams. 22 points, 5, 4, and 3. That's when you had that amazing Alabama, Clemson, Alabama, Alabama, Georgia. 28, 28, or 27, 28, 15. Of course, the Georgia-TCU game, which was 58, and 21. Those are championship games. And everybody except TCU in those championship games, maybe Washington, but they were really good, are pretty much those who you would think would be in a championship game. And those are big boy schools, and you still had on average, I believe, and TCU, Georgia skews that a little bit, but like 28 points on average. The separation between the winner and the loser with those 3 incredible years, Deshaun Watson's big play, Tua, among some other teams, and I guess it was, Trevor Lawrence as well.
I mean, let's face it, there's no way you can rig the system to where there's not blowouts. NFL playoff games have blowouts,
yep.
And I know this is not the NFL. It's not supposed to be the NFL. So if you want to argue against Jim Phillips and say, well, like that NFL example about the playoffs and divisions doesn't work because that's a different game, like I could see where you could come from with that. But, yeah, you're not going to be able to rig the playoff system. I don't think the playoff system was really talked about the way that it was in the – like that immediate 24 hours of those first-round games. Oh. Like if you guys – the overreaction – I mean, the drama queen reactions by like major media figures and thousands and thousands of fans. Like, I expected on social media to some extent, but like the wailing and the moaning about how ridiculous and all this was. I mean, it was so over the top. And then what happened the next weekend? It was like great games. And you know what? I felt like the buildup, even with some blowouts early on, like added to it, though, because it added to this path that you had to take, right? Of like, you weren't just in the Final Four. Like, you just plopped and boom, you're there. It was like you beat a team or two to get there. And there was a story, there was a backstory that I felt like really amped up the game buildup, because here's the road they've traveled to get here. And it wasn't just they won the SEC and boom, here they are. It's like, no, they beat Clemson and then they, in Austin, and then they turn around and they beat Arizona State. And so it built it up. And I think it made those games last weekend feel that much bigger, as opposed to we just fast forwarded to those 4. I think that's where the expanded playoff, to me, made it far more interesting, especially getting down to the nitty gritty there. But, It's not perfect, and I think there was a lot of overreaction. I think, though, that mostly wasn't because of blowouts. I think that was because there were blowouts, and then there were teams that felt like, well, we wouldn't have gotten blown out if we were in that position. And it's like, oh, really? Well, some of you saying that turned around and got blown out. And did get blown out.
Even before the playoffs, but those games, of course, we're always like, oh, well, that doesn't really matter.
Well, that's why you can't just react to that opening weekend and start like, we got to overhaul this thing completely and let the thing breathe. And I think we did. And I think it turned out to be pretty good. But I think, we've gotten to this point, and there are things that you can certainly correct. It's not perfect. Let's tweak some things. But, that's what these next few days will in part be for.
Yeah, and the other thing is that you can renegotiate some money on the next contract. You say, look, okay, you guys want to do the seating, but we got to get some cash back for this. So the money has to change a little bit because you guys got this overwhelming percentage more than we did. So if we're going to give up the fact that we get the automatic buy and we're going to seed straight through, fine. But that has a cost to it. We're not just doing it because it's the right thing to do.
If anybody but the Big Ten and the SEC, if anybody else gives up anything that gets you in the tournament, your commissioner should be fired.
Yeah.
Now, as far as some of the nuances and some of the compromises, however that works, I don't know. But if you do that, you're setting yourself up to step on a big-ass grenade and not have you. I mean, because we know that that's out there, that's a possibility. And what should be the case because of what we saw this year, and Craig, everybody on Friday night, Indiana, was clutching their pearls. It was like, oh, my God, overreacting because they saw the one game.